How does pursuing a PhD in the US benefit international students compared to a master's degree?
My advisor also said that to me. I was going to ask, that was going to be my answer.
So like some students may fear to ask this question, but then like it's very important to like just ask directly.
As a PhD, the chances that you'll get hired to such positions increases.
70% of the companies in a career fair for me are defense related or are space related that require an ITAR specialized license for me to work on that.
How do you start your application procedure as a PhD candidate, and what challenges you guys faced when you were applying for it?
Students should follow their passion because I think PhD is very hard.
I started my full OPT a year before I actually defended my thesis. Either that or actively look at jobs. If you're on CPT and if you get a full-time job with a company, you'll be paid at a company rate, which is much higher.
Hey everyone, welcome to another video. I got 3 PhDs right here. I got Aman, Zarin, and Simran. And I'm going to be asking them every question you're wondering about PhDs and how to get into a PhD, what you want to focus on when you're applying for PhDs, and how to survive PhDs, and then what are the results and job opportunities like when you finish your PhD. Let's start with Aman. Why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Aman Chandra. I'm a senior aerospace engineer with Freefall Aerospace. We're a Tucson-based company, and I specialize in antenna systems for small satellites.
Hi, I'm Zarin. I'm a final year PhD student at Caltech. So during my PhD, I was doing research on the CGM of galaxies using large telescopes. And then we are also building like a UV balloon-based telescope. And then I'm working on the detector for that telescope.
Hi everyone, I'm Simran. I'm an optical engineer. I'm also a final year PhD candidate, and I specialize in UV astronomical instrumentation in terms of optical alignment testing, metrology, and stray light analysis of UV telescopes and small satellites.
All right. There's a lot of questions. There's around 30 questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each one of you one question. And first question is for Simran. Okay. Why did you choose to pursue a PhD?
Well, it's a little bit of a complicated answer because I have a background in electronics engineering. That was my bachelor's. And then my master's was in ECE, electrical and computer engineering. But I was not fully satisfied with what I was doing and the direction in which my career was headed. So I wanted to work in high impact research and something of a niche where I can specialize and be an expert in. So I was drawn to optics because of one of my professors in my first master's that I did. And after that, I realized that that is what I wanted to specialize in. So I started applying to different PhD colleges for optics, which are not many in the US.
Okay.
Yeah.
Zarin, another question for you. How did you decide your research area?
So this is also like a tricky question because to be honest, so I switched my group during my second year while I was in Caltech. So like I basically just like try to build connections with people I know, like they know this group and they know the people in this group and they know the professor is like very nice to students. So like I basically talked to them and then I decided I really wanted to join the group because what they're doing also like fit with my skill sets, which is like optics and kind of like engineering background and then like with a little bit of theoretical stuff. So it's basically, and also like as we all know, I feel like the astronomy department in Caltech is really strong. So I feel like will probably be like a really good fit for me if in the future I wanted to do some like high impact research.
Right. Aman, what factors influence you to, to select UFA for your PhD and your advisor as well?
So in my case, my advisor for my PhD was the same person who advised my master's thesis. I came to the US to do a master's in aerospace at ASU. And so most of my process came there at that stage. But generally, I mean, if one is, I think, really considering research, or PhD, which really includes research, then some of the things that can be done is to really keep an eye out on the research groups that focus on the kind of work that you want to do. I feel that is a stronger reason to choose a professor or a university than the background or the reputation of a university, because if you end up with a professor in a really great university, but they don't really work on what you're really interested in working on, then you sort of they are in the driver's seat and you don't have much say in what you end up working on. So in my case, I looked at universities or research groups in the US that worked on things that I was interested in, and then of course you have to be calibrate your abilities and think of what universities could be within your reach. And so ASU was one of them, and I got in luckily.
How do you start your application procedure as a PhD candidate, and what challenges you guys faced when you were applying for it?
So one of the challenges that I faced was there was not a lot of resources available for PhD applications, and how the SOPs should be formatted. How should you reach out to a professor at a university sitting in India and convince them that you really want to do this, or why you want to do this, and also the shortage of colleges. I think there's like 7 colleges that actually have optics, not as a separate department. That's also a shorter list of how many colleges have optics as a different department, because it generally falls under the electrical category and kind of gets overshadowed. So I think those were like a set of challenges that I faced, that it's kind of shooting in the dark when you're filing an application.
I can also answer a little bit. So I feel like one of the major challenges I faced, but also based on my observations when I'm looking at the undergrads in our groups, I feel like compared to them, like we international students, we normally don't have the experience like working with a potential professor you want to join. And then there's an issue might arise, like if you are not compatible with the advisor, his advising like style or whatever, maybe you will not be compatible with a group even. So like that's something which is like not exactly, but only like you won't see it based on the website. So you really have to talk to them and work with them for a longer time to know. So that's something like students in the US, they will probably like do an internship and then they will decide based on that. But
that's a good point.
Yeah, but for us it's very difficult.
Correct.
And they can also visit here. If you're from here, from the US, you can come in and you can chat with the department or the academic advisor of each college.
Yeah, it's not possible for us to do that. Aman, question for you. Do you think it's necessary to have publications before applying to PhD?
I don't think it's necessary, but it's always good to do that. And the main reason I think is that I feel, at least in my opinion, research is an acquired skill, and it is something that one must truly understand whether it fits their abilities before jumping into PhD, because you're then committing yourself to a few years, and if you're not bent towards research, then it's probably not the best idea to do it. So publications basically puts you through the whole process of what it takes to publish, and really if you're not publishing, then there's no point of doing research, right? Because what are the benefits you're going to reap unless you have something that has your name on it? So it's good if you're in your undergrad or even your masters, like they said, try to find a lab in the university that you're working with. Even volunteer, don't care about getting paid initially. They may not pay you, but just volunteer your time. No one's going to say no to free work. But go to the lab, get involved, get your hands on actual work. They'll be more than happy to put your name on a publication. And that's a really good way to understand what it takes to do research. And then so I think it's highly recommended that one goes through at least that process to understand that, okay, this is going to be my life for the next 4 or 5 years.
Got it.
Yeah.
Simran, next question for you. What are the key factors that make a strong PhD application? Are there any must not miss elements?
The key element is to have a strong profile that says that you have done research, you know what it takes to do research. And like Aman said, it doesn't hurt to have publications or your name on some publications, even if you're not the first author. Just to show that you're passionate about it, that you have a good problem solving psyche overall, that you can take leadership in, that is also very important, because a lot of times while you're doing a PhD, you're the plumber, the carpenter, the painter, everything in your house. So you're kind of trying to build everything yourself and take the lead on a lot of things, take on a lot of tasks that you don't know, but you can learn and then, become an expert on it. And also a strong statement of purpose, good recommendations, from people that not only have taught you, but that you've worked with, that can speak highly for you and also truthfully about your skills.
The next question for you: how can an undergraduate student or early graduate student prepare for a PhD in a specific field, like computer science or pharmacy? But for example, in your case, how can a student who's undergrad or grad can start preparing for their PhD applications?
I feel like it's not necessary, but it's really good if you can have a internship in the US first. So like you could, in my case, I did an internship with Rice University. So like I first found out this group reading their papers, and then I think that what they're doing are interesting to me. So like then I emailed the professor and then say I have this summer, so like I could do research in your group, will you be interested? And then he said yes, so then I can try to do something like this, and then how it works, and then you kind of have this experience, and then you can also if things goes on really well, you can get a recommendation letter. So I think that would be really highly recommended, so you can get an experience first and then you start your application. So and then what else? Also so I feel now with the new technologies maybe ChatGPT, so you could it's really easier for students now to gather information of which groups or what subfields of the field you want to work. Right. So maybe make use of all the things. And also connections. If you know any senior students in the group you wanted to work in, or in the school you wanted to work in, and then you just ask them, and then I feel most times people are more than happy to help you.
Aman, you're working now, so do you think it's better to pursue a PhD directly after a master's or gain some work experience first?
I think it depends on what your career goals are. If you want to be in academics, then it's not that important that you have industry experience prior, and really PhD is the only way to get there. If you want to work in the industry, then I strongly recommend getting an internship and possibly even exploring employment on CPT or pre-OPT for international students while working, and that is mainly to ensure that your skill set is sort of in conjunction with what the industry needs. One tricky thing about PhD is sometimes you get so absorbed in a problem, and then you go on and go so deep into it that you kind of lose sight about its relevance to the larger field. You might be a specialist in something, but if the industry doesn't really care about it, you're not going to get a job. It's going to be hard to get a job in the industry. So you have to be strategic. And when you're doing a research, I would recommend working in the industry if someone can spend a year or two, just to get a feel for, where is, for example, I was in aerospace, where is the field heading towards? What technologies are going to be relevant 5, 10, 15 years from now? Not focus on technologies that are not going to see the light of day anymore, or technologies that are, 50, 60 years away. And so you have to be careful and strategic that way in choosing where to focus on during a PhD, because when you're working for the industry, publications are good, but they don't have as much weight as if you're applying for an academic job. What ultimately matters is your skill set. So if you can show on your resume that you have experience working with, say, some simulation tools, coding, a certain experimental methods, then that goes a much longer way in getting hired with a job as opposed to publications.
Got it.
And also, I want to say, like, sometimes like people think like they will go to the academia route, but then like they changed because like a PhD is a very long journey. It's like several years, so it's highly likely you don't want to do it anymore. So like I feel like it's highly recommended for everyone to just like try to find a real job first for a year or two, no matter what.
Yeah.
Zarin, can you explain your day-to-day routine as a PhD student?
So it's like there are several phases. Like sometimes like I'm an observer, so like I prepare for observations. So then I will spend like maybe several days to prepare my target, and then so I submit the observational list to the telescope, and then we schedule observation. And then for the observation, it's like all night. So that's one of the things I do. And then the other things we do like measurements in the lab. Then like we have to go to the lab maybe like from 8 to 5 or 6 p.m. And then we probably also will going to analyze data afterwards. And then like there's another phase where we're going to launch our telescope. Then like we go to some like launch site in New Mexico, and then we just like
Months.
And then, we just like work very hard like from like 8 to 8, and then like Monday to Saturday, and then we just work just to pick, in order to like meet the deadline for other mission stuff. So yeah, it depends.
Depends on which phase of development you are, because we mostly work on instrumentation stuff, so it varies.
Yeah.
But, in general, like they said, the way universities function, or most professors work is there'll be a deadline, and then things get really intense to meet that deadline, and then there'll be a lull. So as a student, you're also kind of paced by that process. And so there will be days when you have no time to even eat a proper meal, but then there'll be days when you have a lot of time. And also.
Yeah.
Simran, this question's for you. How long does it typically take to complete your PhD?
It varies from field to field. For optical sciences, it takes on an average, I think, 6 years, 5 to 6 years. In instrumentation projects, because I'm working on instrumentation projects, so my pace and the finishing of my PhD is also tied into when the projects will see the light of the day, or when we are nearing the launch for our telescopes and satellites. That's where my work ends. So it's mostly longer. But I think Zarin can add to that in physics. I know one of my friends in ECE whose advisor, it also depends on your group. So his advisor's average is like 7 years. So that's a long time.
Yeah, in our group is also like 7 to 8 years, because like we have to do observations also, which like observations you have to write a proposal and then take years to gather the data and then analyze the data.
Aman, next question is for you. Is it possible to work full-time or remotely while pursuing a PhD?
Yes. So there's especially for international. I mean, if you're not international, then you can without any issues. But if you're international, then there's the CPT program that is designed for people who want to gain practical experience while they're also in their curricular program. Now, one good thing about the CPT program for PhDs is that if you're not a PhD student, then that program really restricts you to 12 months of work experience. But if you're a PhD student and you can justify that the work is directly related to your PhD and will ultimately lead to your thesis, then you can basically get an unlimited extension through the 12 months. So that's kind of what I did. I was lucky that in my third semester or second year of PhD, I was able to start working with this company, and they took on most of my burden from that point of time.
Simran, next question for you. Can PhD students exit the program early and still earn a master's degree?
Yes, they can. they're only going to lose the time that they've spent. But if they decide that, okay, and that happens with a lot of people because life happens and, things change. And as Zarin said, like, you decide to enter a PhD thinking in your head that you're going to be an academic, and then you're going to go and do on a postdoc after your PhD and become a professor, but it doesn't always pan out like that. And some people, they do an internship and they get attracted towards the industry, which is much more fast paced and it pays really well. So they want to just get a master's. And because PhD is also like really grilling, we have to jump through a lot of hoops in terms of like qualifying exams and comprehensive exams and the proposals and all of the publishing. It's not for everyone. So you can just file, like in my department, there's a way that you can do that. You can file forms for that. And because you already need extra credits for your PhD, so you've already surpassed your master limit for credits, you can go on to do a report or a thesis option to get out of the program with a master's.
All right. So next we're going to talk about funding and financial aspects of a PhD. How much stipend do PhD students usually receive at universities? Tell me about your field or anything.
Aman is looking down at his feet like, no.
I got maybe like 3.3K a month, but like the living expenses are really like pricey.
Yeah.
Like the housing and then the food and gas price, I mean, they're very expensive. So like I couldn't save a lot.
You also live in California.
Yes.
So the stipend, I believe, varies according to state by state.
Yeah.
And the living expenses.
Also department to department.
Okay.
And they some have higher.
Yeah.
Simran, Aman?
I mean, all I'll say is that in my experience at least, you'll get some money. Don't expect to be making savings. You will get by pretty decently. I mean, especially if you are single or if you're not caring for a full family, then you will get by without much problems. But don't expect to make a lot of savings.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna mention a range which is general instead of like mentioning the specific case. So depending on which state you are, it's like 20 to 40K, and now it has increased a little bit, but I really advocate that the government or whoever is making the policies should really set up for a higher pay so that we are having, good quality talent and people really want to get into and become a scientist or an expert, which we really need. So that's the range, I think. But you can get by. Yeah.
That kind of covered our next question also. So I'll jump to the third one. How can students secure full funding or tuition waivers for PhD? So,
by getting a research associate position or a TA-ship, which is like a teaching assistant. And it depends on how much you're getting paid, like hourly. So for international students, we have a cap on how many hours we can work a week as a student on an F1 visa here. And it's 20 hours per week.
Yeah, that's right.
On a typical semester, like a spring or fall semester, and in the summer that cap changes to 40 hours per week. So we make more money typically in the summers, where I think some savings can happen. There's some, or you can do like in the internship in the industry in the summers. What was the question again? Can you repeat it?
No, it was
I
the
lost
question how students can secure full funding. So is it true that all PhDs are fully funded in the US?
Yes.
And if somebody's charging for your PhD, should you still go ahead with it?
So a lot of in a lot, it depends again. University department to department have their own rules. But the department I worked at, the rule there was that for the first 1 year, the first 2 semesters, when you are basically meant to look for an advisor. The logistics of a PhD doesn't end at just getting admission. Once you have admission, you also have to secure a research group, which basically means an advisor who's ready to fund you. So now the way to do that is, if you are good at planning and you're quick at your feet, you will have done this before you got admission. If you're late, then what the university provisions is that for the first 2 semesters, you can pay your tuition fee, but you will not be allowed any time after that. So basically, you have 2 semesters to find a professor who is ready to fund you. And if you don't, you're not doing PhD. It's as simple as that. So.
Right.
I can also provide one more perspective. So like a friend of mine, like her job is funding her for her PhD. So like he gets more pay, much more than me, like maybe 2 to 3 times more. And then I also know another international student, like he, on his first year, he did like an internship with like a financial company. And then later on, they're happy to support him for his PhD. Yeah, so in this way, you can get much more.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let your job support you.
What do you think financial challenges are with PhD? Just not having savings. If somebody has a family, what happens then?
I think it's hard. I mean, if you have to support a family, then it's going to be difficult. With the stipend you're getting as a PhD student, you will most likely, like they said, you'll have to supplement that with additional income. And I mean, it depends again from place to place and where you're living. But at least in my case, I don't think I was making enough that I could have supported anyone other than me.
So is it better, from what I understand, it's way better to finish up your PhD as early as possible in your career, just so that in case you have, you want to have a family or your partner is working, then it's fine as well.
Either that or actively look at jobs. Why, if you're on CPT and if you get a full-time job with a company, you'll be paid at a company rate, which is much higher.
It also depends. You could like first find a job first and then do a PhD. So like even though you end up later than the other students, but then you're better faced in your life, I think.
Right. You have some savings also.
And also have like more like social skills, like just from your work experience.
Right.
That is actually, just to add to her point, that is probably the best way to do it, the safest way to do it.
Yeah.
But it's also the hardest. So,
It is the hardest, and it would take the longest actually, because once you're getting paid somewhere else, you have to divide your responsibilities between the company and
Not really longest, because if you are like fresh out of your undergrad and you do a PhD, sometimes you really don't know what's best for you, and then you don't make the best
true.
decisions.
Yes.
And then like once you get a job and have some experience, you are more like mature. So like maybe you can finish your PhD in 3 years.
Right.
I think I mistook her point.
Oh, okay.
I mistook her point. Like, I understood that she was saying that one is doing a job with a PhD. That's why I said the longest.
Yeah. All right.
I'm just saying like it's not like always true like you want to finish it as early as possible.
Yeah.
All right. Next section would be international students and visa. Aman, you've gone through this recently, so how does pursuing a PhD in the US benefit international students compared to a master's degree?
I mean, if you plan to stay in the US long term, then it definitely improves things that you can do. It gives you many more options in terms of what visas you can apply for. For example, if you have a strong publication base, you become eligible for an O1 visa, which is an extraordinary ability visa, which is similar to the H1B, except it's not lottery based, and you get that for 3 years and then you can extend it. If you're looking for permanent residency, then you can get eligible for what's known as a national interest waiver or a NIW. And that bypasses almost a 2-year process to get your green card. So you can get it within like a week, as opposed to 2 years. An I-140 approval, again, to get the actual green card, it depends, because there's a country-specific line. Now, if you do a really good job at your PhD, you have a strong publication history, and you've proven that you've contributed to the field, what you can also be eligible for is something known as an EB1 visa, which gets you, this is the fastest way of getting your green card, and really it's probably the only way one can get it in a small realistic time frame. So those are the kind of options that you get. Then if you choose to have a career in academics, then you also get eligible for a cap exempt H1B, where you don't need to go through the lottery system anymore. So the number of options grows quite a bit, but they all hinge on one making sure that they're active during their PhD time. You need to have publications. You need to have good quality. Your citations are counted, so you can't have one paper in 5 years to show for, and that has like 10 citations or something. So you have to have some reputation in the community. So again, be active as a PhD student, publish, attend conferences, do everything you can. And if you're doing that and you get in that whole psyche, then by the end of your PhD, you will have a strong enough profile to have all those options open up for you, I think.
Maybe we can do another video of just all the link.
I was going to say
all
that's
of the options.
just another video in itself, the visa situation.
Yeah.
Anybody can answer this question. Can PhD students bring their spouses on a visa, and are the spouses allowed to work?
If you're on an F1 visa, no, your spouse cannot work. But you can bring your spouse on an F2 visa. If that's really the only way. There is another option known as a J1 visa, which is for postdocs, so it doesn't really apply to PhDs. But even in that, your spouse can't really work. So no, the short answer is your spouse can't work while you're on a PhD. However, there's one caveat to that, and maybe this is another topic for a separate video. But when you're doing your PhD, you can, once you've cleared what's known as a comprehensive exam, you're eligible for post-OPT, which means that you can start full-time OPT before you defend your thesis. So in my case, I started my full OPT a year before I actually defended my thesis.
Oh.
So that is an option, and so while you're on an OPT, your company might get you an H1B. And on H1B, there's no restriction. You can continue with your PhD on an H1B while working for the company. And if you have an H1B, then your spouse can get an H4, but all of those things are for a separate. So there's a very small, very, very minuscule case where your spouse might be eligible to work, but it's a very small percentage chance.
That is very interesting. I did not know that you can do like a post OPT.
Yeah, I defended in almost a year and a half after I started I was about to apply for my OPT STEM extension.
Okay.
And I defended.
Does having a PhD make it harder to transition into corporate jobs compared to staying in academia? I'll speak on it a little bit. Just from my perspective, again, my field is construction. So it's definitely difficult for people who are finishing their PhDs in construction, because it's a field where they don't really want you to be a PhD, then you're overqualified. There are certain fields like that where you're overqualified if you're doing a PhD. But on all three of your cases, it might be definitely different. So anybody can take this question.
I think it is different going from academia into industry. Even if I will be focusing on R&D mostly, it is very different on how things function. It's a completely separate world, and I discovered that when I did my internship, and when I also network with people at career fairs and I talk to companies. What they require is a different subset of the skills that you already have, which are very relevant. So there's no need to worry about that, but you need to focus and you need to know how to filter that subset of skill set to present yourself better, to let them know that you have what they're looking for. And that takes some practice, and yeah.
Zarin, maybe you can answer this question. What were the biggest challenges, or what are your biggest challenges right now you faced during your PhD?
So for me, because I'm working on this instrumentation project, which goes to space, which means it's basically an ITAR controlled thing. So as an international student, it's sometimes really hard. Not only it's sometimes hard for you to work on the relevant technology. It's also hard for the future if you want to find a relevant job in the field. You have to really like basically get a green card first.
Yeah.
So that's something like if you really wanted to do research in a PhD in this field, you have to think about like the future.
And what's the ITAR clearance you were talking about?
I
What's the
think-
full form?
So it's International Traffics and Arms Regulation.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's two regulatory
Bodies.
frameworks that apply to control technologies. If you're an international student, one is ITAR and the other is EAR. And so if an international student has to work on any of these control technologies, you have to get a license from the Department of State.
Yeah.
And that takes a few months, and so you can't really work on that project till you have that in place, and also it's very specific to the technology you're working on. So if, for example, in my case, I was working on an antenna system, and so I have licenses, but they apply only to that antenna system. So in the future, if I'm working on a different antenna system, that may not apply anymore. And so it's basically more paperwork and one more hurdle that is there for internationals, but it only applies when you're working in areas that are export controlled. So anything that is or can have an application towards national security, defense, those are the kind of things, but that's a very small subset. So a lot of, for internationals, another thing that might be, like she said, is that you might want to think about your career. Like if you are going to look out for a full-time job, maybe don't specialize in something that's export controlled.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to
Which is what
face
we
the
are
same
doing
problem.
right now, yeah.
When you start looking for a job, because then it's possible they can
Yes.
apply for your license and you can do it, but you have to convince them for your visa in any case. Now you have to also convince them to get you the necessary paperwork, and it's possible, but then some companies might just be like, we'll just not deal with it.
They don't want to deal with it, so they just like put a disclaimer because it's not like the paperwork doesn't exist. They just don't want the hassle of going through that paperwork additionally while sponsoring your H1B
Right.
visa or something else. So they just put a disclaimer because for me, I meet mostly like 70% of the companies in a career fair for me are defense related or are space related that require an ITAR specialized license for me to work on that technology. So they would just say that we don't hire internationals or we don't sponsor for this.
Yeah, that's tough. Aman, you graduated, so do you think pursuing a PhD was worth it in terms of time, effort, and career growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, again, it depends on the role that you're in, right? So, I mean, if you're in a role that's primarily research-based, where you're expected to think a little out of the box and expected to push the boundaries of, technologies that exist, then, PhD is the right kind of training that you get. Again, what you do during a PhD matters a lot because, there are people who are really active and then some people are not so active. So getting the right skills, but I think one thing that PhD really trains you for is to take in lots of failure. A lot of times when you try new things, they don't work. Most of the times they don't work, and then you hit that one spot where things are starting to work. So that whole persistence of failing, getting up again, learning, applying that to your work and then moving forward, that has come in really, really handy, at least in my workplace.
What advice would you give to somebody considering a PhD? Are there any specific fields where you'd recommend being extra cautious? Starting with Simran.
Can you explain the question?
Basically, any fields they should be extra cautious.
Applying to in terms of career?
Yeah.
I would say PhD in CS right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Because of how the technology is for computer science, and with AI coming up, AI is a part of everything right now. So I think that's a little concerning that you spend all those years, unless you're doing something really groundbreaking and you already have a plan in your head. And also for fields like aerospace, I think sometimes I don't know, man. Do you think everyone who graduates from a PhD will get a job in an aerospace company that they're aspiring for? Because
No, it's hard. It's definitely
it's
harder
hard, right?
if you're working for something export control, and most aerospace is export control. So yeah, it is harder. It's not impossible. I know people who, my peers, internationals, who are working for aerospace companies. As a PhD, the chances that you'll get hired to such positions increases. Like the will for a company to walk that extra mile for you, to make those, apply for those licenses. But again, you have to show them that you specialize in something that they won't find.
They really have to need you with them. And it's true for, I think, what I've seen from my experience in optical sciences. It's also true for people specializing in optics or working for space programs, because the university and the professor might want to walk that extra mile, like you said, to apply for all that paperwork, but that specific company might not. So yes.
And just to add to Simran's point, be strategic and look at the field, because the field is a very broad area. Look at core areas of the field that you see that there's going to be a demand. Like computer science, for example, if you are doing a job that someone can, spend a couple of years, learn how to code and do it, and if your job requires just that, maybe you're risking it. But if you want to enter, for example, there's a lot of people who know how to run AI codes and run neural networks and things like that. There are very few people who can do algorithm development at that level. Maybe specialize in that if you're interested in computer science. In aerospace, if you are doing something that is, something that even a master's or an undergrad student can do, the industry is not, you're going to be seen as being overqualified. So you have to find that niche that is specialized enough that not a lot of people know how to do it, but it's going to be relevant not now, but at least for the next 5-10 years. Like I know a lot of friends of mine in aerospace or mechanical who specialize in gas turbine engines. The whole world is now moving to electric, so finding jobs for them is getting tough. So you have to keep an eye on what's happening around you, and you have to be strategic that, all right, I really like this field. Does it make sense? Maybe not. And so you have to riff from that point.
Also something like construction. Yeah.
I want to say students should follow their passion, because I think PhD is very hard if you are not passionate about your research. So even though we give the advice like some fields are not really potentially good, but then if you really love to do that, you should still do that, because if you are the top 10% of the students, you can still find a job, find a way to bypass the difficulties.
Simran, this question is for you. How important is the lab atmosphere and advisor behavior in the success of a PhD?
I would say a lot, because it depends on how well you're making use of the opportunity, what resources you have, and how is your mental health. Because that is really important, because we are in this for the long haul, and as they've made a very good point, that motivation is a fuel for your passion, and that you have to have like good mental health to be able to stay motivated and still lead in certain situations. So it's very important. But then again, in the first year of the PhD, that's why I advise a lot of people to go and scout about in different groups and talk to different professors to find a good fit for them, where their colleagues are their collaborators and they're not turning into competitors. Because a lot of time people like to step on each other's toes. Academia is a very good space. People are mostly collaborated. They want to help you, but then a lot of times people want to push you over or step on your toes, speak over you. Things like that happen, and then it's really hard to fight. Because also, if you don't have a good professor, it's really bad to fight that professor, because they have a lot of power. So make sure you're working with someone who is sane. I've been very lucky that I found my professor who is, who gives me that space to kind of play around and do my own thing. Because a lot of professors that I know, they can also be like micromanaging you a lot, or not showing up at all, which is like two ends of the spectrum, which is dangerous.
And use the students for their
publications,
Yeah.
and like put their names on their students' work. That happens a lot too.
Yeah.
Then this question is for you. How do you connect with current and former PhD students and professors during the application or research phase?
Application. I feel like you can send emails, like write very polite emails, and then like if they don't reply, you can follow up maybe within a week. And then if they still don't apply, you just assume they're not interested, and
then you move on.
Yeah, move on to some other one.
Anybody else have any other advice on connecting with fellow PhDs?
Yeah, and also it's very important to talk to not only the professor but also the students to see their perspective. But like most of the time, people will lie to you, so you have to really tell whether they enjoy working in the group or not.
Maybe take them out for a coffee or some social event.
Yeah.
But for anyone researching on where to do a PhD, like Zarin said, you speak to students. Usually all graduate students are listed on the department website, so you can have access to their email address. Reach out to them directly, and most of them are friendly, and they'll talk to you, and they'll give you some insights. They might even arrange a meeting between you and the professor, and that'll be a great way for you to find out. But just generally, if you're planning PhD, give yourself a year or two to prepare and plan, and just don't jump into it. It's a longer.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to say is like, don't be afraid to ask your advisor the hard questions, like what will be my research topic, like for my PhD. So like some students may fear to ask this question, but then like it's very important to like just ask directly.
Yeah, asking questions just early on so that you're clear.
Or like ask for like harder questions, like if I do this, what options do I have after I graduate?
We're going to conclude this video. There's just 2 more questions I have, and it's for all of you. I just need, what is the one biggest lesson you've learned during your PhD journey? We'll start with Aman.
As a PhD student, I think something that my advisor said in the beginning that I still remember is that treat a PhD as a marathon, not a sprint.
My advisor also said that to me. I was going to add, that was going to be my answer.
There'll be more downsides than upsides.
Yeah.
You will not do great financially, especially as compared to your peers who will progress in their careers and start making the big bucks. There will be days when you will have no motivation to do anything. There will be days you will be confused about what you're doing. There will be many days where you will question the very fact that why did you choose to do a PhD. But as Zarin said, the most important thing I think for successfully doing a PhD is that you need to love what you're doing. You need to be passionate about the problem you're trying to solve, and that's what will keep you going, in the hardest times. Then when you, especially towards the end of your PhD, your family will start asking you, when are you going to be done? And you will never have a good answer. And so you just have to power through it. What will keep you moving is your love for the subject. And just general advice, something that I think I didn't do very well is that don't feel bad taking time off. Connecting with friends, family is very important, because you can get lost and then at the end of 5 years realize that you're now disconnected from the rest of the world. So don't do that. It's not necessary.
I would say is to like try to learn to communicate and collaborate with other students. I think that's actually very important, because sometimes you can be very smart and then you can do all the work by yourself, but still it's very, very important to learn from others. Yeah.
I agree with all that they said. I would just add the closing remarks is that I've learned patience and perseverance And just looking on the bright side can sometimes be hard. Like as Aman said, you have zero motivation some days, and some days you can go on because there are more downsides than the upsides, and then you start comparing yourself with people who are making more money or are less qualified than you. And obviously the clock is ticking, so sometimes you start looking at the clock and then you get disconnected and you want to just be in that bubble that okay, this is my day. But trying to find that balance and also focusing on the love and support for the people who are there for you versus the people who are not there for you, I think that is a good way to deal with it. And just keep going, maybe.
That's all.
Yeah.
Well, thanks guys for doing this. We've been going for like 40 minutes now, more than 40 minutes.
With no preparation.
There's no preparation.
This was impromptu.
Appreciate your time. Really appreciate your inputs on whether, for like the next batch of students who want to do PhD potentially. And I'm going to leave all of their LinkedIns in the description below. If you want any help, don't bother them too much. Again, Zarin's rule, if they don't reply twice, just do not text them again.
Just ghost them.
Just ghost, yeah. But thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks for watching this video. We'll see you in the next one.